Welcome inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams. This week, textbooks have long left out an important piece of labor history that happened here in the mountains.
The story of the Mine Wars, the Matewan Massacre and the Battle of Blair Mountain, was deliberately buried in West Virginia for decades.
Now there's a new book about the Mine Wars, written for teenagers. When flooding devastates a community, people can find solace through faith and through song.
Singing has always been a joy. When I sing and I feel God's love and His mercy, I know that He's with me.
And we remember songwriter Billy Edd Wheeler, who passed away last month. Dozens of musicians have covered his songs, like this hit, sung by Johnny Cash and June Carter.
Yeah, we're going to Jackson. Ain't never coming.
You'll hear these stories and more this week inside Appalachia. Welcome inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams. In the early 1900s, the United Mine Workers tried to unionize coal mines in West Virginia. The coal companies fought to suppress that effort. There were skirmishes, strikes, and fights that became known as the West Virginia Mine Wars. The conflict culminated in the Battle of Blair Mountain. It was the largest armed insurrection in the U.S. since the Civil War. I don't know about you, but I didn't learn about the Mine Wars until I was an adult. It never came up in my history classes. The author of a new book for young adults hopes to bring the story to today's young readers. The book is titled The Mine Wars, The Bloody Fight for Workers' Rights in the West Virginia Coalfields by Steve Watkins. Steve Watkins, thank you so much for coming on Inside Appalachia to speak with us.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Now, a lot of listeners are going to know about the Mine Wars, but for folks who may not be familiar, can you kind of give a thumbnail of what the Mine Wars were?
Sure. The Mine Wars, plural, really began in the teens with the Paint Creek, Cabin Creek War, basically union miners, or miners fighting for the right to unionize, I should say. After just years, decades of brutal repression, brutal in the extreme, I should point out, beatings, murders, disappearances, lost jobs, strikes in which children suffered malnutrition. Many died from opportunistic disease. So it really began then. It was a pretty successful strike, but it took over a year for the miners to win the right to unionize. But in southern West Virginia, the owners still held strong sway. The owners brutally repressed any attempts to unionize. You tried to unionize, you get blackballed. They forced people to sign yellow dog contracts, they called them, which if you so much as looked at a union organizer, you'd lose your job. And what that meant down there was you didn't have a job. You had nowhere you could work. You had nowhere you could go and work in the mines. And when there are few jobs and few opportunities and you're working in isolation in these coal mines, that's pretty devastating stuff.
How did you first learn about the West Virginia Mine Wars?
I would say my original introduction was the movie Matewan back in the 80s. I remember when that came out and just being blown away, thinking naively, stupidly, that this is going to wake people up. Well, I don't think that movie made $1 million total. You know, there weren't a lot of viewers, even though it had James Earl Jones, the great James Earl Jones, starred in it as a fictional character. Dan Few Clothes Chain was his character, who was actually transported from the earlier mine war, Paint Creek, Cabin Creek. He was a figure, was very important then, part of the so-called Dirty 11, sort of a guerrilla organization that did the dirty work, for the miners' union. They transported him to the Matewan Massacre and the Battle of Blair Mountain for that movie. So he wasn't really active, or as far as we know, during that. But that was his character. And a lot of people don't know this, but James Earl Jones was when they began funding for the Mine Wars Museum in the town of Matewan, which is in Mingo County in southern West Virginia. He was one of the very first donors. And he has said that Matewan, the movie, was the favorite movie he ever made. So my publisher wanted me to do a deep dive into this and find a way to tell the story that made it accessible for younger readers. As you probably know, Mason, the story of the Mine Wars, the Matewan Massacre and the Battle of Blair Mountain, was deliberately buried in West Virginia for decades. You talk to older people there, and they grew up going to school, never hearing a word about the United Mine Workers of America, about the Battle of Blair Mountain, about any of this. It was just buried in history, in West Virginia history, because literally the mine owners wrote the textbooks that they used. So it really wasn't until, a generation ago that people started reclaiming this history. It's a very gripping narrative of courageous and not always the most polite of people, standing up for their rights. I think it's the most deeply American story and the most deeply inspiring American story, frankly, that we have.
So when you were researching and writing the Mine Wars, what did you learn that surprised or really struck you?
Well, that perfect segue, Mason, because it was the judicious mixture when the coal mine owners and operators, especially in southern West Virginia, went hiring. They wanted to make sure that they did not have employees or their families that would cause them any trouble. They wanted a docile population of workers that they could control, and they controlled them in every way they could. They owned the houses, they owned the stores, they paid in scrip, not in cash. They basically worked in the isolated places where people had few options. And so this judicious mixture was an idea by a mine operator and owner named Justice Collins. Justice Collins' idea was this: hire a third West Virginia mountain folks, white people, hire a third blacks from the deeper South, many of them former slaves or the descendants of slaves, hire a third from Eastern Europe, where there was a lot of coal mining. And so recruit a lot of people from Slavic nations, from southern Italy, and so forth. Populate your coal towns or your coal camps with these segregated sections of Eastern Europeans who didn't speak the language of the others, blacks and whites, none of whom the assumption was in this judicious mixture would work together. They would work underground, but they wouldn't organize together. So that was his idea, and he sold it to the mine owners organizations, and so this caught on, and so mines all over embraced this practice, and it totally backfired on them because, for one thing, when you're underground, you're covered with coal dust. Everybody looks the same, but also the common cause these people had, the things that united them was so much greater than the things that might have divided them. And so they came together. And the United Mine Workers of America was the first of the unions that said, we will not discriminate on the basis of anything. And so you had African Americans, white hillbilly Americans, Eastern Europeans coming together, not divided in the ways that certain politicians trying to divide us today, and successfully so. They were coming together for common cause, to support their families, to stand up for their rights as workers, their rights as Americans for free association, freedom of speech. And that's where the union, came in, and they combined to unionize. I mentioned Dan Few Clothes Chain earlier. Well, the three leaders of the Dirty 11 were Dan Chain, who was African American, was a guy named Rocco Spinelli, who's from Italy, and a guy named, the greatest name ever, Newt Gump, who was just a hillbilly West Virginian. The three of these guys, they went to federal prison together. They organized together. They literally fought together, and they fought for one another. And to me, that is as American a story as there is, the people coming together to stand up for their rights. And these people were proud of themselves as Americans, not as some dissident faction. They saw themselves as proud Americans and proud West Virginians.
How have people responded to your book? What are you hearing from them, and especially from young people?
What I'm hearing directly has actually been from the parents of kids who are picking up the book, kind of like you did, going, I had heard these stories, I hadn't read them, pulled together in this sustained narrative. What I'm hearing is that people are drawn into the narrative just because it's a hell of a story. I mean, the characters in this story and the drama, frankly, is just gripping. It's kind of unbelievable. Things happen, a lot of pretty intense violence, assassinations, and they sent biplanes to bomb the miners, for God's sake. And I think, people are recognizing the need to recognize and celebrate what I had hoped that they would, which are the contributions of these union leaders who literally put their lives on the line and lost their lives in many cases.
Why should young adults, or people generally, learn about the West Virginia Mine Wars?
I think America has turned its back on labor. The labor movement has always been fighting uphill. In a way, the Battle of Blair Mountain is a metaphor. These guys are literally fighting their way up a mountain, seeking justice, seeking to roll back, martial law that had been declared. Many of their companions over there in Mingo County were arrested just for talking to a member of the mine union, just for having a copy of a mine union newspaper. That's it. And I think we take the labor movement and those who have labored at our own peril. I don't think we want corporate America running the show here, even though they kind of are. The labor movement's still very active today. We look at working class and middle class. You look at what labor unions have done for us in terms of ensuring fair wage, safe working conditions, all of the progress that we've made in terms of protecting young people in the workplace. All of that didn't come because of the largesse of the owners. That came because of activism from, the bottom up. Reclaiming your past, your history, your story, and taking pride in it. I think too often we're an economy that kind of divorces ourselves from people that pick up a shovel and and get down there in the mines and put their lives on the line to make a living, but also to serve the country. And we do ourselves a disservice by taking all that for granted. And this is a story, one of many, that helps reclaim that history and tell that story, I think.
Steve Watkins, thank you so much for coming on Inside Appalachia and speaking with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Mason.
Steve Watkins is the author of The Mine Wars, the bloody fight for workers' rights in the West Virginia coalfields. Coal has been an integral part of life in West Virginia, almost as long as it's been a state. Even as other states have moved away from using coal to generate electricity, West Virginia still relies on coal to keep the lights on. But that may be about to change. WVPB's Curtis Tate has more.
Appalachian Power is at least considering a conversion of 2 West Virginia power plants from coal to natural gas. That's what a company executive told the Virginia State Corporation Commission in recent written testimony. The John Amos and Mountaineer plants in West Virginia supply power to Appalachian Power's Virginia customers and burn a lot of coal produced in the region. But the region also produces a large amount of natural gas, which has become the preferred fuel for generating electricity nationwide and in the states surrounding West Virginia. And new federal regulations for carbon dioxide emissions could encourage the switch. Robert Jesse, Appalachian Power's vice president of generating assets, told the Virginia Commission in August that gas was a viable option to help the plants meet new U.S. Environmental Protection Agency emissions requirements should they survive legal challenges. As recently as 2021, the West Virginia Public Service Commission had approved other environmental compliance upgrades that would keep them operating through 2040 as coal plants. In addition to regulatory changes, the economics of generating electricity have shifted in favor of natural gas and renewables and away from coal. Seth Feaster, an energy analyst for the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis, says such conversions are common and not difficult to do.
These kinds of conversions have been done all over the place, and they're common enough that I think that it's not a big reach for this plant or both of the plants to actually get that done in a relatively short period of time once they get approval.
No plant in West Virginia has been converted from coal to gas, but it has happened in nearby states and within the territory of American Electric Power, Appalachian Power's parent company. That includes the Big Sandy plant in eastern Kentucky and the Clinch River plant in Virginia. The West Virginia PSC approved the Clinch River conversion in 2014. Charlotte Lane, chairman of the West Virginia PSC, said her three-member commission had not been advised by Appalachian Power that a conversion was under consideration for the Amos and Mountaineer plants. Lane said the company would need the commission's approval for a conversion of the plants. Karen Wissing, an Appalachian Power spokeswoman, said the company, quote, continues to look for the most efficient options to power progress and business growth. That may or may not involve converting coal plants to natural gas, she said. One sure opponent of any attempt to convert the plants, West Virginia's coal industry. The state remains the nation's second leading coal producer after Wyoming, and its power plants are still a big customer. The coal industry has deep historical and cultural resonance in the state, and many elected officials are committed to its survival. Governor Jim Justice amassed his wealth in the coal business and has been one of its biggest defenders. Chris Hamilton, president of the West Virginia Coal Association, said his organization had not been made aware of Appalachian Power's Virginia testimony. He said the proposal would have negative economic consequences for the state's coal-producing areas. The industry and its allies have made a steady pitch for coal's reliability. If you always have a supply ready on site, the plants can run when they're needed. Gas, on the other hand, is supplied by pipeline and could be vulnerable to disruptions. Yet thanks to hydraulic fracturing, or fracking, West Virginia has an abundant supply. It is the nation's fourth leading producer, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration.
West Virginia is in a pretty enviable position here.
That's Rob Jennings, Vice President of Natural Gas Markets for the American Petroleum Institute.
And so you've got the gas you need right there.
Helping meet emissions requirements works in favor of gas, Jennings said.
When you switch from coal to natural gas in a power plant, you reduce your emissions by about 60%, between 50 and 60%, depending on the efficiency of the coal plant and the efficiency of the new gas plant. So that's really the biggest benefit.
In addition to cutting carbon emissions, gas plants produce no sulfur dioxide, which can form acid rain and must be removed with devices called scrubbers. Gas emits less nitrogen oxide, which forms smog, and it avoids the disposal costs of coal ash, which can contaminate groundwater if not handled properly. Gas, though, still emits carbon dioxide. The production and transportation of gas emits methane, an even more powerful planet-warming gas than CO2. Gas as a substitute for coal generates some opposition where coal has a lot of support, Jennings said.
But I think maybe the larger place where you tend to see resistance to this is from the environmental side.
If EPA's rules prevail, existing coal and new natural gas plants will have to capture 90% of their CO2 emissions within a decade or shut down. Environmental groups would prefer to see Appalachian Power's coal plants retired and replaced with renewables like wind and solar and battery storage. Sooner or later, the company will have to make a decision on the future of its West Virginia coal fleet.
You may want to support the coal industry in the state, but if it's going to raise costs for ratepayers, then it starts to become an increasingly challenging proposition to come up with the money that supports keeping it a coal plant.
Feaster says the plants might be at a tipping point, where it becomes more attractive to run them on gas instead of a fuel long associated with the state. For Inside Appalachia, I'm Curtis Tate.
Coming up,
Mommy can help.
Life is easy.
the soothing sounds of an old guitar provide relief after devastating floods. You're Inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams.
Like you've never known.
Support for Inside Appalachia is provided by Concord University, offering 31 bachelor-level degrees and 6 master-level degrees for students of any age. More information at concord.edu.
In the aftermath of Hurricane Helene, we're reminded that when disaster strikes, people in Appalachia step up to help their neighbors. In the summer of 2022, floods devastated parts of eastern Kentucky. At the time, Folkways editor Nicole Musgrave lived in the area and was part of a volunteer group helping people muck out and gut homes during flood cleanup. One of these homes belongs to James and Ruby Boggs. They live in an old coal camp called Millstone on the North Fork of the Kentucky River. A month after she was there as a volunteer, Nicole returned to catch up with the Boggs family. And she heard about the joy that comes from the soothing music of an old family guitar.
On the day of the flood, James and Ruby Boggs had about 4.5 feet of water rushing through their 2-story house. I was here a few weeks after the flood with the volunteer group. We helped tear out drywall and flooring with the Boggs' daughter, Dorena Dunbar. I'm back now a month later, and Dorena takes me inside to show me their progress.
Well, it looks a lot different since I was last here.
Yeah. We got, we had this donated to us and this donated to us. Just got it yesterday.
Some insulation and some drywall?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Dorena's in her 50s and grew up in this house. Music was always a part of daily life for the family, and it remains important today.
When we have Thanksgiving, we have Christmas, anything, we all start singing. It's all music. I got a brother who plays the harmonica. I sing. My other brother sings, plays guitar. Now I have a granddaughter who's picking up the guitar and playing, and she can yodel like my dad. She can.
Dorena's parents were part of a well-known gospel group in the area called the Happy Notes. The Happy Notes played on the local radio station and at funerals and revivals. They even recorded an 8-track that Dorena sang on. Dorena's parents, James and Ruby, are in their 70s now, and they don't perform as much as they used to. Lately, Ruby's voice has started giving out.
I've actually wore my voice out where we've sang so much for so many years, and I'm not ashamed to say that I'm very loud.
But James and Ruby still sing and play at their church and with family. So in their house filled with floodwaters, one of the things they were most worried about was James's guitar.
47 years we lived here, we lost everything downstairs. And my guitar was in here.
The guitar was downstairs, in a case, propped up in a corner of the living room.
I figured it was destroyed.
When the water receded, James spotted the guitar case in all the mess. It fell apart as soon as he opened it. He pulled the guitar out and looked it over. There was a little mud on the neck, and the strings needed to be replaced. But it wasn't warped or cracked. So James decided to give it a test.
I said, oh, Lord, have mercy, Ruby. I said, that if it rang, it'll be all right. So I got it now. It rang. I said, thank you, Lord.
Even though the guitar rang, Dorena says it still needed some work.
My younger brother, Duran, took it to his house, and he cleaned it and shined it and put all brand new strings on it. And the case that he had that fell apart, we just got rid of it, and my brother got him a case and put the guitar in it.
A couple of weeks later, the whole family gathered outside the family home to celebrate James's 79th birthday. And they presented James with a spruced-up guitar. Surprised and delighted, James tuned it up and led 4 generations in a rendition of I'll Fly Away. Someone in the family recorded the moment and shared it to Facebook.
It's all singing tenor and low tenor and all this stuff, so all of us was singing the song, and we just enjoyed it, didn't we? It was just a really awesome time.
Dorena says some people were surprised that her family was able to express so much joy amidst the hardship.
People started responding to it and saying that we were singing joyful songs, and the flood was behind us. We had all the debris outside, and everybody was saying it's a time that you all have joy, when, most people don't got that joy. But I know that it all come from God.
In the aftermath of the flood, singing together has been a source of comfort for the Boggs family. And as Ruby explains, it's also a way to reaffirm their faith after tragedy.
Singing has always been a joy. When I sing and I feel God's love and His mercy, I know that He's with me. For the God on the mountain, He's still God in the valley. When things go wrong, He'll make them right.
7 months after the flood, James and Ruby are still waiting to move back into their home. The family's been navigating some illnesses, so rebuilding has taken longer than they'd hoped. But they've hung sheetrock on the walls, and a local nonprofit helped get them a new heat pump at no cost. A friend of theirs is a carpenter, and he's been helping on weekends. They hope to move back in 2 to 3 months, before the 1-year anniversary of the flood. For Inside Appalachia, I'm Nicole Musgrave in Millstone, Kentucky.
When life said it's best, but it's down in the valleys of trials and sorrows.
Yes, Lord.
That's when our faith is really put to the test. Hallelujah.
That story is part of our Folkways reporting project, which covers arts and culture in the region. To learn how you can help people affected by Hurricane Helene, visit our partner stations, bpr.org in North Carolina and wuot.org in Tennessee. Artist Charlie Brower has spent decades building large outdoor sculptures and displaying them across the country. A few years ago, he started to lose his eyesight, but he was determined not to give up art. Radio IQ's Roxy Todd visited Brower's studio in Floyd County, Virginia, where he's been busy crafting new work.
The drive to Charlie Brower's home studio passes through miles of forest. A walking trail wraps around the studio, dotted with wooden sculptures he's built over the years.
I want to be an artist that has an audience of some kind. I'm not like internationally famous where they're flying my work all around the world to be in exhibits. So I kind of create my own place here to see my work, both the outdoor things and the indoor things.
Before we walk the trail, I step into Brower's brightly lit studio where he's sketching an image of trees with charcoal. Charcoal is new for him. He started using it when he began losing his vision 2 years ago. His wife was driving him to doctor appointments. All the while, he was trying to figure out how he could continue to be an artist.
There was never a thought that I was going to then not make art.
On these drives, his attention became focused on the silhouettes of trees. As his vision was fading, they suddenly were the most vivid thing he could see.
I started seeing characteristics that we admire among humans. I started seeing those being played out in trees and in forests.
So he began sketching trees. He draws them with big, bold lines on huge pieces of canvas. He still has some vision and found a way to make art that stands out to his eyes.
I picked charcoal because it's very strong, dark lines that have high contrast and I can see them. So there's a start.
One day, he hopes to display these pieces in a show. For now, only visitors have seen them. And over the past few years, there have been many. Interest in his sculpture trail increased during the pandemic and has continued.
And some people will take a couple of hours and they stop somewhere and eat their lunch and just take their time. And I don't charge anything for it. Sometimes they bring me baked goods, and I appreciate that too, but
there are more than a dozen sculptures along the trail. One is modeled on his granddaughter, sitting on a bench. Another is based on a time when his grandson Alex was visiting.
And I gave Alex a walking stick and I said, let's go for a hike.
Alex was a bit hesitant.
So I started singing the song. I can't sing, but anyway, it went, I love to go a-wandering along the mountain path, and as I go, I laugh and sing, my knapsack on my back. Val-de-ree, Val-de-ra. And when I got to that point, then Alex was with me. He started singing along with it, and we went off and hiked around the house.
Lately, he's been trying out a new technique. With help from a graduate student, he chars a sculpture with fire, a form of preserving the wood without using paint. The first piece he made this way shows a person pulling a ladder. It's called Hope's Passage. He's working on a new sculpture called Appalachian Circle.
A sculpture that has been through fire. I think there's something nice about that. I like that.
At 77 years old, Brower says he can't imagine being anything other than an artist.
I think as people, we're not so likely to change what we've done for a long time.
But, he says, continuing art has meant finding ways to adapt and change his methods. And with his eyesight making it difficult to transport his art far and wide like he used to, lately he's been finding venues closer to home. 16 of his sculptures are currently on display in the plaza at the Berglund Center in Roanoke and will be there until next May. In Floyd County, I'm Roxy Todd.
In Fleming County, Kentucky, there's an old covered bridge that's been a popular tourist destination for decades. The Goddard Covered Bridge was built in the late 1800s, then moved in 1933. It extends over Sandlick Creek, where the road leads to an old country church. That church celebrated its bicentennial in September. Samantha Morrill at WMKY, Morehead State Public Radio, visited the church and has this story.
On a late September Saturday afternoon, community and church members gathered under a big white tent to pray, pay respect, and celebrate 200 years of Goddard Methodist Church in Fleming County.
We want to begin our program today with prayer, with an invocation by Reverend James Down.
We thank you for the faithfulness of your people over these 2 centuries.
The day was marked by prayer, music, recognition of veterans, and a historical reenactment.
Looks like we have a visitor here. Welcome to our event, sir.
Well, thank you. Thank you. What's going on here?
We're celebrating.
That was church trustee Steve Miller talking to Joseph Goddard, as played by retired Colonel Jim Clark, United States Marine Corps. Clark told the story of how the Goddard family came to North America in the 1700s and settled in rural Northern Virginia, where they soon started hearing about unrest in the colonies.
We would hear things about the Stamp Act or the Battle of Lexington and Concord and some things like that. So we knew some things were going on, but we knew that freedom was important to us, and especially freedom of religion.
So, in 1777, at the age of 15, Joseph Goddard enlisted to fight the British.
I was in the light infantry, and they created this plan to expel the British from Stony Point. And General Washington assigned Mad Anthony Wayne to lead us.
That battle was won, and Goddard soon received his discharge papers. He married a local girl named Frances Glasscock and had children. In 1795, the family made their way to Kentucky and Fleming County, where the Goddards started spreading their Methodist faith.
I was a trustee of the Tilton Methodist Church, but now you all know it now as Flemingsburg Methodist.
Goddard was instrumental in erecting a second church in Fleming County. Then, in 1824, the couple drew up a deed selling an acre of land for the creation of a third church and burial ground.
Francis and I sold this land for 12.5 cents to the trustees, and I was one of the trustees at the time.
200 years later, several descendants of the original 5 trustees were in the audience and in the community, carrying on the tradition of spreading the faith. Brenda Plummer is president of the Fleming County Museum Society and has been a member of the Goddard Methodist Church her whole life.
In the past, I've been a Sunday school teacher, I've been a youth group leader, I've been a vacation Bible school teacher.
For decades after it was built, the church was the central hub of the community.
Looking at the place now, you would never know it, but there used to be a school on the other side. There were at least 3 stores on the other side of the road. There was a phone exchange. There was a of a grist mill.
None of those structures exist anymore, but the church is still central in the hearts of the congregation, with birthdays, anniversaries, funerals, and more still bringing them together. Plummer says a common request is for weddings.
Some are familiar with it, some are not. They just like the setting.
A sentiment difficult to deny on that sunny afternoon. The newly reopened Goddard White Bridge just outside the front door. On the day of the bicentennial celebration, the bridge had drawn some visitors of its own.
So today, me and my sweet peoples are traveling through Kentucky to see all the covered bridges.
That's 31-year-old Maria Grimsley, about halfway through her journey to see all the state's historic covered bridges, 3 of them in Fleming County.
I think they're beautiful, just the scenery and how old they are, and just to know that people back then traveled through what I'm seeing right now.
Built at an unknown date, it was moved to its current location in the early 1930s. However, Brenda Plummer says the bridge is synonymous with the church.
You can't think of one without the other, because when you drive through it every Sunday or Sunday night or Wednesday night or Vacation Bible School week, that's the way for many, many years, that's the way you came.
Pastor James Doughton says the congregation of 30 to 35 people is similar in size to what it would have been in 1824. He attributes the group's strength to the legacy of Joseph Goddard.
We celebrate all of that history and thank the Lord for His faithfulness over the last 200 years and for the people here.
And He walks with me and He talks with me and He tells me I am His own.
For WMKY, I'm Samantha Morrill.
Three years ago, West Virginia filmmakers Shane Pierce and David Gravely set out to make Ambrosia, a screwball comedy set in Beckley, West Virginia. The film recently premiered and is showing around the state. In 2022, Folkways reporter Clara Hazlett spent some time on the set of Ambrosia and brought us this story.
Beckley filmmakers Shane Pierce and Dave Gravely wrote and directed the comedy Ambrosia. They're not full-time filmmakers, but it's not just a casual hobby either. Their shared interest in film goes way back.
Shane and I met in high school, and we were just really interested in film, and it ate up most of our conversations, just talking about, hey, have you seen this movie? Yeah, I've seen this movie. Come over, let's watch this movie.
That went on for several years, until eventually they decided to give it a go themselves.
We got together, Googled how do you write a script?
They called themselves Butter Chicken Pictures, in honor of the meal they shared on their first day of shooting their first short film.
Dave and I are both big food fans, and we both love butter chicken.
On their first feature film, they brought on Beckley photographer Seja Montague as their producer.
I was just totally unaware of what I was walking into. And when I got there, I was like, man, this is weird. I didn't know there were people like this in Beckley that were doing these cool things.
When they decided to make their second film, they knew they wanted to shoot it in Beckley. And the Ambrosia Inn was the perfect setting.
We all drive by the Ambrosia every day on the way just to get to our houses.
It was an old coal baron mansion that had been turned into a bed and breakfast. And it has personality. It's almost a character in and of itself.
It's a very bizarre looking location. Its architecture sort of sticks out. It's kind of isolated, it has a big plot of land, and it kind of juts up in all these strange directions.
The film would follow a day in the life of Quilliam Frankfurt. He's the fictional owner-operator of the bed and breakfast.
Hello, Quilliam Frankfurt, owner-operator.
Hello.
And one stormy summer day, the guests are all trapped inside.
Good morning, West Virginians. I'm meteorologist Roger Moore. I'd love to tell you this because I'm a weather guy. It's going to be bad, bad, bad.
Quilliam has high standards, and with a house full of quirky guests and a storm on the horizon, he has a lot on his plate.
Martha, I need updates for rooms 3 and 4 in the suite.
Spotless.
Listen,
I was in the pantry earlier this morning.
Once Dave and Shane had decided on the plot and the location, then came the challenges.
There's a practical barrier of like, well, I'd like to make a film, but there's nobody else really in West Virginia right now making films. I don't know how to do that.
And there's the psychological barrier.
I have an ambition, but I'm from West Virginia, and people who are from West Virginia don't do those things. If they want to make a film, they move to New York or they move to LA and they go to film school.
But Shane says community support for their project outweighed those challenges.
People are hungry for this stuff to happen here, and it doesn't matter if they're involved with it. They see those crazy people across town with their camera crew, and they're filming some slapstick gag in the backyard of this mansion. It's just exciting.
One day we were shooting, and the neighbor had started up his John Deere mower at like full blast. I mean, you know, the guy was like doing circles around his lawn, and you know, we're on a very tight deadline here. We have to finish this scene. People have to go to work. And so we were like, we're going to have to tell this guy to shut his mower off, which is not a good feeling, because like, who are we to tell this guy? So we go over and we talk to him, and he was excited to shut his mower off so we could shoot the scene. And I was just like, man, it feels really good to be in Beckley right now.
The production of Ambrosia was a statewide collaboration involving multiple generations of West Virginia filmmakers, like Danny Boyd, who started making films and acting in the 1980s. They asked Danny for advice on the film.
And he's like, yeah, let me just come down and hang out and let me just be on the film.
Danny ended up acting in the movie alongside an actress who had acted in his own movies back in the 80s.
I'm more proud of that than almost anything else, because like we carried on the flame of something that started a long time ago.
Dave and Shane also invited film students from Marshall University to intern on the Ambrosia set. Shane says they wanted to show the interns it's possible to make a film in West Virginia.
You don't have to go somewhere else to make a film. It may be a little bit harder to do it here, but at the end of the day, I mean, you can do it. You can pull it off.
With help from Mountain Craft Productions out of Fairmont, Butter Chicken Pictures spent about 2 weeks filming Ambrosia last summer. They recruited and hired actors, many of whom were not actually actors by trade.
The way Shane and I like to do it is if there's a certain personality that we find interesting in town, even if they're not an actor, we'll just say, how about you just be in the movie?
They kind of create their own personalities and their own characters that we honestly probably couldn't have written. And it adds that level of Beckley weirdness that I think we want to come through.
One such character was David Sybray. He played Stanley Kubeletz, a filmmaker and explorer staying at the Ambrosia Inn.
Amusingly, they wrote me into this. The character is to some extent myself.
In real life, David is the publisher of West Virginia Explorer magazine. He'd acted a few times in high school and college, but he'd never done anything at the scale of Ambrosia.
The first day of shooting was the hardest day, and I was almost in tears by the end of the day. You know, I'm 55. And, you know, it was 10 o'clock at night, and I had been there, I'm sure, since 7 a.m. And they were still going. We were all still going.
David, like most of the cast and crew, was taking time off work to shoot the film. And even though filming the movie was no vacation, David says Ambrosia gave him the chance to try something he'd always felt inclined to, but never pursued professionally.
Discovering this part of myself again was a breakthrough. Now I'm an actor. I always was an actor. I've always been an actor.
Will we be having Ambrosia this evening?
7 o'clock sharp. My favorite scenes were the dinner scenes. I think we had 8 people at the table, and the directors and soundmen and lighting, the forks and the knives and the spoons and the goblets and the place was just perfect.
Shane says Ambrosia is just one part of a creative renaissance happening in Beckley right now.
It's like every couple weeks, you're just seeing new projects. Something new is happening in Beckley.
And while Ambrosia is still in the editing phase, Butter Chicken Pictures is already looking forward to their next film.
You really go into it and you become this like family unit, and you just become so close, and then it's over and it's like, oh, let's do that again. Like, what's the next thing we can do? Because I want that feeling back.
Ambrosia is set to debut at the Raleigh Playhouse in Beckley later this spring. For Inside Appalachia, I'm Clara Hazlett.
Ambrosia recently screened at the Mountain Craft Film Festival in Clarksburg, West Virginia, and will be shown around the state this fall. Singer-songwriter Billy Edd Wheeler died in September at the age of 91. The West Virginia native and longtime North Carolina resident was best known for writing songs like Jackson, which won a Grammy for Johnny Cash and June Carter. He also wrote Coward of the County, which was a hit for Kenny Rogers, and It's Midnight, which Elvis Presley recorded. Mountain Stage's Larry Gross was a friend and fan of Wheeler's. Producer Bill Lynch spoke with Gross about Wheeler's legacy.
Easy question. When did you meet Billy Edd?
Well, let me tell you when I first heard of Billy Edd, then I'll get to the part when I first met Billy Edd. When I was a teenager, and I was starting to listen to music and play music. And I listened to a lot of country, folk, traditional folk, and pop folk, things like the Kingston Trio, but, Johnny Cash. And I heard some songs I really liked, and they had something that in common, but I didn't know what it was. And as a kid, I looked up who wrote it, and it was Billy Edd Wheeler. And it stuck in my mind because it's 2 D's, Billy Edd, E-D-D. And as a kid, I thought, I don't know anything about Billy Edd Wheeler, but I thought, must be a good songwriter because he wrote Desert Pete for the Kingston Trio, and Reverend Mr. Black, the Kingston Trio, and Johnny Cash both sang that song. And Judy Collins sang Red Winged Blackbird, and which I really liked that song a whole lot. But I knew nothing about West Virginia coal mining or anything else. And a lot of that, like Red Winged Blackbird, that's what it's about. So let's fast forward, and after I start singing and make some albums, and I come to West Virginia from Los Angeles, and I'm on a program for the National Endowment for the Arts, and they gave us money to bring some people in as guests, and I was up in Barber, Tucker, and Randolph County. So I paid for Billy Edd Wheeler to come from Nashville to sing in the gym of Tucker County High School with a tiny PA. And it was a big deal because I had heard all these songs for years. And of course he had many others that I began to find out about. So that's the first time I met him. He was a character. As a matter of fact, he told me he wanted me to go get some Boone's Farm for him in his room, in his hotel room, which I did. I went to the 7-Eleven or whatever it was, the Go Mart, and got him some Boone's Farm. But I got to know him more over the years because then we had him on Mountain Stage, and then he became part of the West Virginia Music Hall of Fame. He was one of the first inductees, rightfully so. Told me a lot of stories, and later I read his autobiography, which then told me more stories about his connection with Lieber and Stoller. And it's pretty interesting. The great songwriters who wrote 1 million hits for 1 million people. He became friends with them because he was like a hillbilly country guy in New York City, singing folk music and stuff. Just went to see them and said, "Can you help me?" And they kind of liked him because he was so bold to come and ask, Lieber and Stoller, "Can you help me write songs?" And they listened to his songs. They said, "Look, you're a good songwriter, but we're in for hit songs. We want hit songs. This is not hit songs. This is folk songs." They said, "If you have something, send it back to me." Finally, he said he kept sending stuff to him. They said, no. And then finally they hit one. And then later he told me that when he wrote Jackson, that song, he took it to, I think it was Jerry Lieber, and said, "What do you think of this?" And he had like 12 verses. And the guy who was looking at it, he said, "This is okay. This is pretty interesting." He said, "Okay, but get rid of the first 5 verses and start off with 'We Got Married in a Fever.'" And Billy Edd said, "Okay." And things worked out pretty well. The thing that's really the most touching and most moving and means the most to me was that the West Virginia Music Hall of Fame put out a record of all Billy Edd Wheeler songs done by many different people. And there's plenty of songs. So Bob Thompson on piano and me singing got to do Coming of the Roads, which was such a touching, beautiful song I heard when I first came to West Virginia. And the longer I stayed here, the more I understood what that song was about. It was obvious in the beginning, but it even goes deeper, when the roads came in so that they could make the mines and take out the lumber, everything changed.
Did you keep in touch with him?
I kept in touch with him a little bit. The best fan letter I ever got was him writing to me telling me he liked my version of Coming of the Rose. To me, that was it. I mean, that was because I listened to this guy when I was 12 years old or 13 years old, and he wrote me and said I did a wonderful job on Coming of the Rose, and I thought I'm going to keep this email forever. You know, I may print it and put it on the wall because it's the best review I ever got.
Artists, sometimes you think about their legacies. What do you think is Billy Edd's?
Well, Billy Edd was a natural. He definitely wanted to be successful. In some ways, he reminds me of Louise McNeil, who I worked with, the poet laureate of West Virginia, and I'll tell you why. Because even though she was a natural and she was almost like grew out of the ground in West Virginia, she really wanted to be successful in a popular way. And she was happy when one of her poems was published in Life magazine and she got money for it. And people would think, some people think, that's commercial, and no, she thought that was great. And Billy Edd the same way. Of course, he wanted to have hits, but he also had the ability to write these songs like High Flying Bird, like Red Winged Blackbird, which they communicate so much about a way of life.
The Boone's Farm, do you recall what flavor it was?
I don't. I didn't know. I didn't drink at the time, and I didn't even know the difference between them. I think it was red.
Larry, thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Everyone considered him the coward of the county. He'd never stood one single time to prove the county wrong. His mama named him Tommy, but folks just called him Yellow. But something always told me they were reading Tommy wrong. He was only 10 years old when his daddy died in prison. I looked after Tommy 'cause he was my brother's son. I still recall the final words my brother said to Tommy. Son, my life is over, but yours has just begun. So promise me, son, not to do the things I've done. Walk away from troubles if you can. It won't mean you're weak if you turn the other cheek.
Till next time, thanks for joining us as we journey throughout Appalachia. Our theme music is by Matt Jackford. Other music this week was provided by James Boggs, Amethyst Kia, Caleb Cottle, John Blissard, Paul Loomis, Chris Knight, Johnny Cash and June Carter, and Billy Edd Wheeler. Bill Lynch is our producer. Xander Alloy is our associate producer. Our executive producer is Eric Douglas. Kelly Libby is our editor. Our audio mixer is Patrick Stevens. We had help this week from Folkways editor Jennifer Gorin. You can find us on Instagram @InAppalachia. You can also send us an email to insideappalachia@wvpublic.org. Visit wvpublic.org/InsideAppalachia to subscribe or stream all of our stories. Or look for Inside Appalachia on your favorite podcast app. Inside Appalachia is a production of West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
Support for Inside Appalachia is provided by Concord University, educating the people of our region and beyond for more than 150 years. More information at concord.edu.